the tribe the opportunity to educate us on some of the fish science. We've got Chris Knudsen here from ODF&W that can fill in. So I've asked Chris, so the way the State Marine Board works is if ODF&W asks us to provide rules for the protection of fish, we do that as they're our biologists. And so, but that has to officially come from ODF&W. So Chris is in kind of an awkward position today because I don't know that ODF&W has discussed what their options or what their recommendation is going to be. And so Chris doesn't want to make a recommendation contrary to what his agency has to say. So Chris, I kind of talked to him ahead of time and said, you know, if there's facts and data he wants to share, that's great, but we're not going to ask him about an ODFW opinion on what should happen. Is that a fair assessment?
That's right on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, if you have any concerns about what's been presented today, we're going to have lots of opportunity for public comment. So if you feel there's science that contradicts what's being presented today, you'll have the opportunity to present that to the Marine Board in public comments. And the board does read comments, and so they will be looking and understanding, you know, potentially both sides of the whatever controversy may or may not be there. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stan and Dylan. Is that right? Okay.
I'd like to make a comment first, if I could. I thought these meetings were for the RAC members, the committee members to speak. And so I'm wondering why non-committee members have the floor.
So we've asked them to provide a discussion, to lead the discussion.
So can we get at the next meeting, have a committee or have a presentation for our side?
So let's talk.
Okay.
We'll certainly consider it. Angela?
So this isn't one side versus the other side. This is a science presentation. So we wanted to sort of frame this question in terms of the science as it's understood. And so, you know, we've looked into it. We've done some research into the literature and other things that we just like to present today as a discussion point so that we all sort of have some understanding. And, you know, I had specifically asked if ODFW could provide, you know, a presentation.
You did.
And, you know, so just the facts, you know, about the salmon, about how the river's being used and the seasonality of it and the impacts of boat traffic on habitat. So that's kind of what this is. It's not an opinion. It's sort of the science.
So let's talk after this meeting, Jay, and if you want to propose something, I'll certainly listen to it.
Yeah. I know in the first meeting, Chris testified that the Siletz was the shining star on the Oregon coast with the salmon run. Both the Chinook and the Coho are doing great. And that's why the limit is so liberal there compared to other coastal rivers. They're only allowed one a day. It's 2 and 10 this year, and the fishing's fantastic on the Siletz. And that comes after the last several years of increased motor use, and the fishing just rocks out there. So we talked about that at the first meeting, that I want to establish the fact that the Siletz was the best salmon fishing on the Oregon coast.
Yeah. No, I remember that.
Okay, you remember? Okay. Just making sure.
So what I'm going to be doing, like I said at the first meeting, I'm going to take, you know, all the comments, compile into an overview of what was said, what occurred, what recommendations we liked, what recommendations we didn't. I don't think we're going to have a unified recommendation. So it'll be providing the board with the variety of opinions we've heard. And so all of that's going to be included. So I'm not trying to, and I don't take this as, because the tribe is saying this today, that's the direction the board's going to go. Like I said, the board's independent. I can offer suggestions, but they can offer not to listen. And frequently, you know, they make up their own minds based on the comments that they read and understand and what they feel is appropriate. So this isn't going to limit any discussion, what the board sees. Like I said, if you have studies that counter what the tribe's going to say today, you're welcome to submit those.
Yeah, I just feel like it's biased and unfair that non-committee members are getting to testify. I thought that it was in the bylaws, or not the bylaws, but the format for this is just the 7 of us were to testify.
We can have people present.
Okay,
So, and like I said, if you want to propose something, I'll certainly listen.
great, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Stan, Dylan, are you guys ready?
Ready?
I'll sit down.
So just for a little bit of clarity for me, is the whole meeting about this, or did you guys, do you have a more full agenda, or?
It's the Stan and Dylan show today.
Okay. All right.
So, sorry, it was kind of a last minute deal, so trying to.
No, that's fine. All well and good. And just for a little bit more clarity, Angela reached out as we directed Dylan and I to try to put together a compilation of the available literature. So what she shared with us is that she'd reached out to ODFW and said, can you guys provide some background of basically a literature review of what's out there? And essentially the answer was they weren't available to do that. So I believe Angela then said to ODF or to you all, well, can our staff put something together? So that's how we're here. The literature that's out there is very limited. We've all, I think most of us in this room talked about this available literature in the last 2 or 3 rounds this conversation has occurred. So there's nothing new that hasn't been out there or just came out in the recent years. What we're going to show you today for a little bit of video is just something that we ran out and did on one day that we had available. So after the last meeting, we were talking a few weeks later, I think it was, maybe even a month later. And I said to Dylan one day, hey, it looks like the crew isn't totally booked today. Let's grab a couple of boats and run down river and see if we can, I'll put my face in the water, I'll grab a snorkel and or I'll grab an underwater camera and we'll just start to get a feel for what everyone's saying. This happens and this doesn't happen. We have these old studies. Let's put our face in the water and see if we can see anything. Very simple. So my background involves a fair amount of research on fish populations, counting small fish, large fish, looking at habitat, where the fish are, where the fish aren't. If I were to go out and design a study, it would not at all be what we're going to show you today. We'd have a wider range of things that we'd approach. We'd have multiple boats. We'd have multiple water levels. We'd have different kinds of gravel, riffle, etc. We didn't have any of that. We just said on a Thursday morning, let's grab a couple of boats and run out to Jack Morgan, put our faces in the water and see what we can see. I think what we found in those couple of hours was pretty illustrative, and I think it's valuable, and we're willing to share it with you guys. And again, we had no plan to dominate a meeting or to come in and say, wow, we got the killer information here. We're going to shut everybody down as soon as we got this. We basically got it, and then our group talked, and we said, this is pretty interesting. I think we should do A, B, and C if we ever want to carry this further on. Then Angela came to us more recently again and said, hey, there's a need to share what scientific literature is out there, to summarize it, and to do a presentation. So that's why we're here today. So Dylan went back to some of the literature that's out there. We chatted a bit about what we thought was useful and what wasn't useful. Some of the literature that exists is on more of an international basis. Some of it examines boat use in lakes and shorelines. Almost all the literature focuses on wakes and the effects of wakes. There's a handful of papers that look at things like, well, these 15 studies were done and these folks concluded A, B, or C from each of their studies. And based on that, we think that there is an effect in general of motor use or there isn't. But those, again, are kind of big picture. And it's stuff you would expect. So when you got humans and you got motors and you got boats and you got beaches, you're not going to have a habitat that is the same as something that is more natural and in a swamp or somewhere like that. So you're going to affect the bugs that are in the gravel. You're going to affect the baby fish, the reds, if you're in a lake, in a shallower lakeshore and all that sort of stuff. Dylan pulled out 3 research projects, one of which we're going to focus more on, that ODFW focused on during the rogue evaluation. And then there's 2 additional citations that he'll talk about that have a more, I think, close relationship to the questions that we all are debating here today. So with that, go ahead, Joel. Jump in.
Oh, that's not
Get
it.
started.
All right. Yeah, so jumping in here, we're just going to talk a little bit about some of the available information associated with boat motor usage and critical life stages of salmon. I think it's really relevant too that the tribe bring this up and talk about it. They are recognized as managers under the MOA, so it is kind of helping steer management decisions. All right, the topics we're going to discuss here. I'm just going to overview a little bit of that scientific information that Stan just discussed. We're going to talk a little bit about fluid pressure from motorized vessels and what that looks like in relation to substrate along the bottom, gravel, inter-gravel movement. And then we'll talk a little bit about what Stan mentioned, that Siletz specific testing that we did, which again was pretty minor. Testing is a liberal word. It's just some observations that we made. Yeah, and then honestly, yeah, actually, great, Jake. And one thing too, I want to stress to everybody, this isn't us here talking to you. This is to spur discussion. Yeah. So if you have questions, comments, whatever, come on, blurt them out. I'm not here to talk at anybody. I'm here to discuss.
Yeah, I was just wondering what your training is as a biologist. I mean, do you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Although, I don't think it's good to base someone's previous experience, like take that and like, oh, what they're saying is 100% true or false or whatnot. But my experience, both in fishing industry, I grew up as a salmon fisherman. I went to Oregon State, received a bachelor's degree. I worked for the Department of Fish and Wildlife locally here out of the Newport office. I worked on Chinook coastal research and monitoring programs here out of the Nestucca. And then I actually started guiding in Alaska and guided up there for a while, and then started guiding down here in Oregon. So I moved away from biology and worked as a professional fishing guide for about 10 years, and then went back and received a master's degree in fisheries science from Oregon State University. And then I've been employed as a biologist for the tribe. So that's a little bit about my background.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And Stan, do you want to give your credentials too?
Oh, and I guess, sorry, Stan, one other thing is that I did teach for a little while at Oregon State, fly fishing and steelhead fishing classes. So I actually like talking and discussing things like this. It's a lot of fun, in my opinion.
I have an undergraduate degree in genetics and microbiology. I went into computer business for about 4 years after that, then went back to fisheries, started working for the state in the mid-'80s, and I've been in fisheries since then. I received a master's of fisheries science in the 90s. Doing it for a long time. My fish experience, again, a lot of work with habitat, a lot of work with evaluating juvenile populations and smoking fish and restoration projects and that sort of stuff.
Are you guys employed by
The tribe, yeah.
the tribe? But okay,
Yeah, sorry, I'm
all right.
been employed by the tribe since 1997.
Yeah, and I should state I'm no longer a fishing guide, so my license is not active.
All right.
Yeah, great questions. Anything else?
I got a question, but we'll get there when I think you start talking about your actual observations from that day. But
Yeah. All right.
yeah, well, we can talk about what
You
you
sure?
Well, let's just say, so when you guys went out and looked at all this, was this in the last couple weeks, months? Was this summer flows, winter flows?
Well, yeah, I mean, unfortunately, since this has come up, I think the tribe submitted the petition in April or March. And so we haven't had a lot of great flows. There was some spring flows and we tried to time it with that.
So, but what we're going to see today was we can call summer flows where there's a non-boatable section probably of the water.
I think that's a really good question. And I actually have CFS graphs from that day. So instead of giving you my interpretation, you can look at it and make that determination. Yeah. Again, I'm just trying to present some information. I'm not trying
What
to
was
influence.
the CFS I had?
I think the gauge height was like almost 3 foot, give or take. So
What was the CFS should have been, it was more of a spring, and my memory is it's better than we often have before the first October rains. So, you know, when people, when that first big fall pulse of fish comes up. So.
It would
but
definitely be-
not a summer low.
Yeah, definitely higher than now. And also given that the river is at the lowest point it's ever been.
And we ran the boats to Jack Morgan, so we went down to Jack Morgan, the slot you all are familiar with against the ramp with the rip wrap. That was probably a little more than waist deep, maybe above the belly button. And then the island was immersed some, but you could probably get, I don't know, maybe 12, 15 feet across there before you're in knee deep water. And you'll see the the prop distance from the gravel source itself.
Yeah, and I love these questions because again, we're not trying to like hide or be biased towards anything. So we want everything to be out in the open. All right, so jumping in here and discussing a little bit of the scientific information that's available in relation to motorized vessels and sensitive life stages of salmon. And just to elaborate here, when we're talking about sensitive life stages, this is kind of defined as fertilized eggs in gravel, alevins, which is the kind of the next life stage. So it's like a small fish with the yolk sac still attached that feeds off that yolk sac. Generally, those are still down in the gravel, protected. And then fry. And some fry will stay in the gravel for a little while, and then they're kind of out migrate out. But at those life stages, fertilized egg, alevin, and fry, the fish are very sensitive. And then also spawning adults, right? And so during the best available literature that's associated with motorized vessel usage and those sensitive life stages of salmon shows that there can be a negative impact. Things, and one of the main studies that ODF&W has recently used in their comments, and that was eventually used for their proposed regulations on the upper row, was this Sutherland and Ogle paper. And in that paper, they actually looked at how the boat moves through the water, and they measured the pressures off the boat and the motor and how those pressures are exerted onto the bottom of the river, right? So as that boat was moving through the water, they had pressure sensors along the hull of the boat. And what they found was that there were two main pulses of pressure. One of those pulses was near the midline of the boat, so in between the bow and the stern, right at about midship. And then there's an actual gap in pressure just forward of the propulsion unit. And then at the propulsion unit in this study, they did use a jet. There's another increase in pressure. So there's two pressure points occurring. One of those is caused by the boat itself contacting the water and being pushed. That creates a fluid pressure that pushes down on the bottom that disturbs gravel. It moves gravel around and it will push gravel out. There is also pressure from the propulsion device. And like I said, in this study, they did use a jet. But regardless of the propulsion device, that boat was still pushing on the water. That force creates an equal force down onto the bottom of the stream.
Do you have any information on the boat?
I do. Actually, we have some other slides that we'll get into. But yeah, that's a really good question. On that study, if I'm remembering the methods correctly, I think it was a 20-foot sled. I can't remember the horsepower, but it was a jet. So I'm not sure on the size, but enough to push the boat upriver. And then some of the other information, specifically from Sutherland and Ogle, shows that intra-gravel movement will kill fertilized eggs. There's another study, Hill, I think it's 1994, and that also shows that this movement of gravel, displacement of gravel, can kill eggs. It can move eggs off of redds, and it can harm and cause mortality of those sensitive life stages of salmon. So that's kind of down, very, very simple. What we pulled out, I'm trying to get off in like, the weeds here. It's just that the boat moving through the water creates two different pressure points. One of those pressures is not associated with the propulsion device, and that pressure can move gravel, which we know can cause mortality of sensitive life stages of salmon. All right, come on, what questions you guys got?
Okay,
Let's talk through
I'm
this.
assuming the hull pressure is pointed down
Mhm.
and the jet in this case is pointing out. So which one, or both of them, have the most impact?
So this was actually taken from that study. And I think Stan can elaborate a little bit more on this, but this is a cross-sectional diagram of that boat in that study, a 20-foot jet boat moving through the water. And so,
Dylan, are you citing the word that second impact zone? Is that right? As
What?
the motor, the second impact zone is the propulsion.
yeah, because this is
From
the
the jet.
intake of the jet.
Right.
So which,
And then the
There's a-
propulsion is right behind it.
But they didn't, I don't want to get the beats here. This drawing is really tricky to interpret was for us. But I read this as, this is all more reason to discuss this is, as that this is the second place in the hull, but there's impact, but it's not. So this drawing, if you guys look at this paper, is super challenging to interpret for me. But what you have here is a drawing of the hull here, and then they're superimposing the response, the pressure response as the boat passed in the gravel where their devices are. So they're saying that this is the greatest pressure, and these are the kind of the wave patterns, and then this is the second greatest amount of pressure. So there's one more fore and one more aft, and then they're describing the intake for the jet there.
And I think these are measured in kilopascals and it's just a function of pressure. Yeah.
and just so I can understand, how deep of water are we talking? I mean, is this, I'm trying to wrap my head around how deep from point at which the boat.
So they measured, and again, this gets back to my comments about the perfect study and, when we ran out, what conditions were we in and all of that. They measured at
It actually
half a
says
foot,
right
1
here.
foot, and a
This
foot
one's
and a half. And then their speeds, I had you write those down, John. I believe they were like 8, 15, 20. But this paper is widely available and,
So we're talking of 6 inches, 12 inches, 18 inches, 24 inches of water with a pump.
yeah.
We're going.
Yeah, but at the speeds that they made. Yeah, and they had some pretty high mortality rates.
Yeah, I think
Like
these
they're
ones showed mortality from 37% to 24%.
The
So
message,
this actually says here, this is a water depth of 300 millimeters at a speed of 6.7 meters per second. So that's a little over 13 miles
30 millimeters.
oh, yeah.
Yeah, so again, we're not saying that this is a direct comparison to what we're seeing on the slides. We're just talking about the available scientific information. This is all that's available.
Well, no, I would totally agree. I mean, if you're running a pump in 6 inches of water, yeah, I mean, I
Yeah,
don't think
and,
anybody's gonna argue the fact that you're gonna damage the bottom, but
yeah, and it's even crazy that this pressure,
Don't get sidetracked though. Don't get lost that you're talking about the propulsion from the jet disturbing the gravel. You're talking, this study is focused on the fact that you've got a vessel with a bottom going over the water surface at a given speed, and that exerts pressure.
I get that, but compression's at 6 inches, 8 inches, but when you start talking, 7 feet, 8 feet, 9 feet, when these rivers flowing at 7 foot, I'm not sure in a drift boat at 7 foot, you're even gonna be in the same realm of ballpark of running a 15 horse drift boat motor as opposed to running a 200 horse jet and 6 inches of water. I mean, we're talking apples and oranges.
yeah, you guys should, if you all should discuss that. I know from my personal experience, fishing on the river that, you don't always fish at 6 or 7 foot, you fish at lower water levels too. And there's times when you might be going upstream or downstream through areas where, yeah, maybe the gauge height is 6 foot, but you still might be going through.
So I'm still having trouble interpreting the data.
Mhm.
So what's the important factor here? The size and speed of the vessel or the propulsion type?
They observed increased mortality, increased pressure And then when they replicated the pressure, so what Dylan didn't share with you is they took this pressure that they observed, these pressures, and they went into the laboratory and created a pressurized system with gravel. And essentially it was a water pump pumping in through a pipe with gravel that they placed eggs in. So the eggs were at a certain stage, they put the eggs in there, mix the gravel, and then they pushed the water against it to create a pressure that equaled these different pressures that they observed. And so with the higher pressure, they found higher mortality. Now, whether we would see the same mortality in the Siletz River with different equipment or not is open to discussion.
Yeah.
But what I was particularly interested in, because I looked at the study a long time ago, and I thought that this was all about jet propulsion and disturbing the gravel and stuff, but it's not. It's about passing a vessel over the water and just that speed and passage, how that creates a pressure downward. That does occur. That's a physical thing. Now, what any individual river, the depth and speed and size of motor and all of that, that's a broader topic. What we're trying to share with you today is that's what this paper produced, and that's what ODFW defaulted to help evaluate the rogue question.
So if I can real quick, just to kind of set the table here, rogue is a different situation, I think, biologically than we're talking about in the Siletz. So yeah, you hear Stan say that we defaulted to this on the rogue, different situation. In terms of the size of the boat used in this study, it was about, these were small jet boats. These are like 12-foot long jet boats.
20 foot. Actually,
4 meters. Maybe I did my metrics wrong.
Maybe I read it wrong. I have the study if you
4
like it,
meters,
actually.
about 12 feet.
Yeah. So yeah, my notes here, maybe my notes are wrong. 4 meter long. With the Ford V4 engine, could have been longer, but I got the sense they were the kind of these almost mini jets. Yeah. The mortality issue, as I understand it, and again, I could be wrong, range was 20 to 40%, but that was based on multiple passages by the jet boats, kind of the worst case scenario. And that mortality level decreased with increasing water depth, just in general.
Yes.
As you would expect.
Yeah, to me, this is all very, this is what happens when you put, motors in a river. It's gonna happen.
Yeah, and I think if I remember right, this New Zealand rivers of concern, I think they were more like Metolius type rivers, Chris. It's been a long time since
Yeah,
I was
I think you're
about
right.
that. So they're smaller boats, and the one of the values, I think, of the reason this has been brought up over the years is that they use stock of Chinook from the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
So,
I got a question.
so why don't you show some of the video?
Mike has that question.
I got a question real quick. Excuse me. Would an electric motor have the same negative effects on the riffles under propulsion?
Anything, if you were running a sailboat at the same speed, in my mind, same speed and the same size vessel, you should see a similar result, excluding the effects of the prop. That's a separate set of effects that these guys aren't focused on.
So really in that thought, a drift boat going downstream, rowing and hitting the wakes as they go down is going to have a similar effect, right?
I don't know if your water,
I mean, if you're
I
saying a
can't
sailboat's
answer.
making that effect, then a drift boat going against down is going to have.
Well, we're not saying a sailboat, we're just saying a motorized vessel. That's what this looks at.
Speed.
But I get your point. And I don't know what the break, with the water moving, if there's a difference, if you're moving with the flow of the water or any of that. But I understand what you're trying to get at.
Yeah, and I'm not a boat builder. I'm not a physician. I'm just, we're just talking about this paper. But I think that's a really good question, right?
I get what you're trying to say. I'm just saying any vessel going against, when you have compression underwater of a vessel, is going to cause some form of whether it's motorized, non-motorized.
That's what we understand the physics to be, based on this paper and a couple of the
I had a question.
Yeah.
If you're in a lab setting, there's no pressure on the gravel until you exert the pressure on the gravel. But in a river, when all the gravel's underwater and there's a flow over it, there's a constant pressure on that gravel all the time. And so a little extra would be greatly minimized. It's not, to me, it's not even a fair comparison to compare a lab situation where there's no gravel pressure to flowing water in a river that has a constant pressure over the gravel in the whole area. But that's just.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. You know, one thing that I thought of too, when comparing the lab situation to the actual river state, is there was nowhere for that gravel to go to. So it wasn't, and something we saw with some video trials was that gravel would get blown out into the, you know, the river. And so where are those eggs and fry and alvin's going to, versus when they're in a tank, there's pressure exerting down and there's nowhere for them to go. And I don't know, and there's no papers that I know that look at that impact of when they've been moved out of the rig and dispersed.
Keep moving.
All right. Citation. So yeah, if anybody wants to check out any of these papers, I'm more than happy to give you I'll print out the papers and bring them at the next meeting.
We'll have this available on our meeting minutes.
There you go.
So.
And yeah, we're fully acknowledging too that these studies are not the Siletz, right? So it's not the right type of boat motor combination that we typically see. But it is interesting. It's kind of provocative to think about, right? So like, what are we seeing on our river? And like Stan said, we had a little bit of time this spring. Unfortunately, we don't have any funding to run a multi-year study, but hey, if the Marine Board wants to fund us, we'll do it. So we just went out with what we had, the boat motor combinations that we had, just to get some underwater video, right? Again, this isn't perfect, but it's just to think about what's happening out there. The boat motor combination that we used was just a typical 17-foot by 60-inch drift boat, aluminum drift boat, and it had a 9.9 horsepower motor on the back end of it. This is a really common boat motor combination that we see out there. And, you know, from winter steelhead fishing to drifting for fall Chinook. And we went out to Jack Morgan Park to do the testing. And all we were looking to do is get some underwater video to see what's happening as we're operating that boat upriver from a run through a riffle, you know, simulating, hey, running back up to refish or maybe getting back up to some different water. And here is, and again, I know that's small. It might not be easy to see, but if anybody wants, I can email them the link to these dates, but that was a CFS. Again, is that the best flow? No, but that's what we had to work with on the day that we had. And we haven't had a lot of increased flow in the in-between times to produce.
You remember what the date was, Dylan?
May 15th, it's right up there. 2025.
Yeah, I don't know where it is here. I think we were at 300 or so. So here's 100 CFS. We often are around 100 CFS this time of year, but it's not at all unusual to be down in the 90s or even 80s. This year, we hit 50 CFS, I think almost 4 or 5 weeks ago. As you guys all know, it's been a super low water year. Probably not too many people are going to try to go screaming up riffles this year because of the consequences to your boat. So I think we were, again, Dylan can provide this later, but this is 100, 200, 300. So I think we were in this zone, and you can see that this is well above well, this is last year. So we only have last year shown here, but this is less than 200. before the 1st of November, and that's kind of like the first couple of bumps of rain, where folks often start fishing more heavily, for these guys.
In context, on this day you did this, did you see any other motorized boats on the river that day?
No, it's summer. It
On
was,
that day, no, but I went out fishing a couple, I think that weekend, I think I saw 2 or 3 after that bump.
I think it was after the late winter steel ever would have been coming in, I believe, and then it was before we had any pulses of summer. So it was a pretty quiet, but I think, didn't you go springer fishing or something the week
Yeah, after that
before,
bump,
or-
I did go fishing. I think I saw 3 motorized boats out there. Again, that's anecdotal data, so like, but you asked, so I'm happy to.
Just, yep,
Yeah.
just for context.
This was done this year.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, the
So
intent though was,
the hydrograph we're looking at is last year. right?
yes, yeah.
Well, that hydrograph there with the star indicates the day that we went.
Okay.
Sorry, you're right, Chris. I asked Dylan to put this up so we could do volumes, and we can't tie these two together. Right now, I'm gonna get on my cell phone and try to tie them together. Why don't you do the video? Dylan?
The idea, Chris,
Okay.
was to get out at
Yeah.
a level that was high enough to have the boat out, but also, we were trying to be opportunistic and be out there at a water level that was higher than, the early periods
There are volume.
that we have heard complaints about in the fall.
Yeah, no, I get it. I was just confused, like usual.
Now that the graphs are challenging.
So I am going to, the video is slowed down, but I'm more than happy to play it as many times. And there's a couple of different videos we'll look at. So yeah. So again, this is 17-foot by 60-inch wide aluminum drift boat. The part for me that was really interesting is that when we were talking about that paper earlier, we were talking about that fluid pressure coming off the bow. And when we watched this video, the first couple times we actually could see that, and we didn't really understand what was going on, why there's rocks moving in front of the motor.
So how fast are you going?
That was just the speed required to move the boat upriver. I'm not sure, we didn't have any GPS units there. But just the throttle required to move the boat upstream. And again, that's gonna vary.
You do not have any clips where you're approaching that we had.
Yeah, there's 4 different videos.
That was probably like fast walking speed.
So this is a typical tail out for the reach spawning area.
It's a gravel bar, that's just upstream of a ramp that was shown on the right. We observe reds there every year in this exact spot, so yeah, it's pretty.
So are you underwater there or are you standing?
Camera, I'm standing and the camera's underwater on a pole out in
Okay.
front.
I was wondering how you didn't get swept away if you were. Be fast current.
Yeah.
And you can see there's the ramp right there.
Yeah, as far as speed too, Alan, that there was one person in the bow, you can see there, on the drift boat.
Had he gone a whole lot faster, the boat would have, the bow would have just raised up more than dug the boat.
See now, see.
A reason.
Can't see anything over there to use the mouse.
And how far to the side of the boat are you?
Yeah, you can see. I think, I have to look. I think that one was probably about 10 feet.
Oh no, I might have got it too slow. And I can play these at full speed too. I found them to be more useful, so maybe we'll watch this one at slow, and then we can watch the next one. Might have gone too slow. Hey, Alan, can you tell me, what is the playbacks? Was that 0.5?
0.5. I'm assuming that's 50%.
Yeah.
I'd like to point out that particular riffle, there'll be streaks of that spawning on that riffle in 2 weeks.
Well, it's interesting. It appears that it's just the gravel in front of where you're standing that's impacted. The gravel directly into the boat, I'm not seeing it move as much.
There's
So
like a
there's a-
buffer zone. in
Well,
there.
There's a wave of a pressure wave that comes out, and that's what Dylan was
Yeah,
mentioning.
but so I guess on the study, it looked like it was going down to, because when you're going forward, the boat rises. So there has to be a force
Right.
going down.
They weren't measuring dislodged gravel, they were measuring pressure.
No, I understand, but the pressure pushes down to lift the boat up. But this appears that the pressure is going to the side.
Yeah,
So the down.
yeah, it's pretty interesting just because I'd never stuck my face under a boat on the edge like that, but to see that wave of dislodged gravel, if you will, is pretty interesting. And that prop on the last one, I think it looked to me like it was probably 8 to 12 inches off the bottom. That water right there, again, I think was belly button deep, a bit more deeper on this side. And it's kind of tricky, it's hard to get a perfect line and then come right next to somebody standing there to stand in the gravel, hold still and whatnot.
So
But
there you
that-
can see it more under the boat.
Yeah, and you can see and you're not close enough to really see the disruption of the prop itself on the gravel. I believe we had, either in the comments, you can see some of the gravel there. In the comments early on, I think, when the petition process first took comments from anyone interested. And then I think there was a gentleman who lives at Cedars Creek, and I can't remember whether he showed up here or not, but he made some comments about being frustrated when boats run upriver around the Cedar Creek area or cycle, and just the amount of turbidity that shows up that puts the fish down or makes it more challenging to fish for. I can't remember. It should be in your record. Like, I gotta wait 20 minutes or something. It comes through because the whole river goes sour looking, and you can see just with this small boat and this small motor how much turbidity we kicked up. And it's not necessarily sediments, it's algae, dead algae, and everything else that still is in the water column. That we didn't spend any time looking at literature for those, but I assume that's having an effect on adult fish as well.
I mean, looking at that,
Ability to breathe.
that motor's pretty much right on the gravel, right? Like
Yeah, and they do actually make prop savers. Like Max makes a skeg runner prop saver that allows you to do that, to run.
yeah, no, yeah, yeah.
That to me, I think it was running like 8 to 12 inches off the gravel, but it's all just my interpretation. We didn't run a camera right on that. Yeah, I think we had somewhere that.
Now we have one more video here. So
I thought you had one where I was close to that prop, not the larger.
yeah, we only have one more of the larger prop. So we have one of a 60 horse, right?
Yeah.
60 horse prop. And all we did on this one was just try and demonstrate. So we go from motor neutral to motor in gear, no throttle, right? So just clicked over and then come off neutral again, and then neutral to in throttle to third of a throttle, a burst.
1,500 horse. Yeah, enlarge that screen.
Yeah, I can't see the.
Bottom right.
And the boat was in the current, but just being kind of bumpered or, in place. So we could actually get a clean shot because the current moves, it moves the boat around. So
And this is just in gear.
right now it's in gear, no throttle. Back to neutral, and then we're going to go in gear at some point. Throttle first.
Realistically, I can't see many guys running a $30,000 outboard in water that shallow. You'd have to be a fool to sit there and idle near rocks with you could bend your prop shaft. If anything, you could run through there on plane and then you're way up high off the ground. But nobody, who idles?
So that kind of relates to my question.
Yeah, nobody does that.
So last meeting, we established that essentially early October, when we get the first rains, that's when the fishing pressure starts. And then it continues through potentially April for steelhead. So what are the flows at that point, and what fish are in the, life stages are in the river?
So let's back up for a second. My understanding, based on Marine Board comments, is that we've got all kinds of interesting craft going up rivers and small creeks and banging around in super shallow water.
So that's typically
Secondarily,
mini
my
jets.
understanding from Mike is that he's observed some of our local fishermen doing exactly that.
Yeah.
Screaming up shallow ripples. Am I incorrect on that observation, Mike?
Not at all.
So whether it makes sense to you or me, Jay, and ruining equipment, that's one thing, but I would argue human behavior is going to allow for that to occur.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not
No,
supposed
you're,
to give my opinion here.
but so I think on the mini jets that have been a problem in a lot of locations, because we have a jet ban at Jack Morgan. In theory, it's illegal to run your mini jet or any jet above Jack Morgan. Does it happen? Can't say that it doesn't. But from a regulatory standpoint, we've done what we can to address that. The rest is going to be an enforcement issue. But I'm just kind of curious.
So, and I
how
guess
does it
too,
correlate to flows and what?
one other comment there, talking about the jet ban. And I think this warrants further discussion based on what we're talking about here is it matter the type of propulsion? Because the boat itself is creating this pressure wake. And I'd love to hear more comment on that.
So I get that, but I'm just saying we've addressed the mini jet issue with the jet ban. But so how, going back to my question, what are the flows compared to, the October through April timeframe, and what life is in the river at that point?
What's a normal January to April flood CFS flow in the river? Nolan's a fishing guy. You should, both and Logan, you guys have an idea of what's a normal, I know it goes up and down.
2,000 is what I would.
So 10 times what the flow is we've seen here, right? 200 CFS is what I agreed, a normal flow.
Yeah, throughout the winter, anywhere from 400 to 3,400 is what we're fishing on.
Okay.
3,400 really probably not going to be disturbing much gravel, but this last winter we had a month-long streak of no rain in January, and I was fishing the river at like 3.4 feet or something, you know,
So that's-
ridiculously low, which is close to what we were fishing or what the video is on. You know, it's within half a foot.
The river fluctuates so much in the fall time. Let's just say you're gonna allow motors on the Siletz River. It don't matter if the water's 5 feet or 3 foot, they're gonna blow up the damn river. Regardless of their props or electric, whatever. So I'm not kidding you, the only way to cure this problem is to get rid of the motors. No getting around it. You'd be doing the river a hell of a good favor.
So I also think too, oh, sorry, Angela.
Well, I just want to point out again that we are in a record low year for the river. We are going into winter at the lowest water levels we've ever recorded. Are we going to have enough water through rain to bring that river back up to quote unquote normal levels? Our normal levels keep shifting and we're getting drier and drier and drier. And so we're looking to the future and what we need to do to safeguard this river and the resources it supports. And so that's my concern, is that this year we may have particular issues because we are starting from such a low level right now. And, you know, it's still dry out there.
So one of the things we did on the Rogue is we put a limit on CFS. If it dropped below that, then all motors are banned. Is that part of the discussion? Should that be part of the discussion?
Well, it could be, but you know, one of the things we haven't addressed at all is disturbance and stress to those spawning adults from the motors themselves. You know, there's shock waves of sound going through the river, you know, and there's noise associated with that. And those fish are so sensitive. I don't know that there's much literature out there around that.
There was some literature that showed that it could, there's not a lot looked into it, but some that shows that it could move adults.
Displace fish off spawning areas or whatever. So I think there's other impacts.
Yeah, no, I'm not arguing. I'm just trying to understand.
See, so it's okay to comment. I know we're just presenting, but
Yeah,
I think what I've observed you guys, how you kind of moved through your conversations, and I missed the last meeting, but it seemed like initially the momentum was we've got potentially a fall issue where the water's shallow. Many of us feel like there's a much higher likelihood of harming eggs and spawning fish, etc. And then and less conflict because there aren't as many anglers out there and they aren't competing for the same holes. And then you guys all moved into more of the winter steelhead fishing zone. But hey, yes, the water's deeper and we're not going to be chopping up fish or whatever the thought is. But we've got people recycling holes, and that's the conflict. And I don't know if you guys are still kind of trying to address that in a split fashion or not. But is that true, Alan?
so I think that's a good recap. But my role here is just to get a broad of spectrum of information as possible. So I can include that to the board as to what was discussed, and they'll figure out, you know, like, you know, potentially, does it make sense to have a flow restriction where if it hits whatever number, then we ban motors altogether? Does that make sense? Does it not? I don't know. And like my question, I'm trying to understand, you know, that when we have the higher flows, when fishing occurs, I don't know what fish life stages are in the gravel, where they're at in the gravel. I mean, some of this, you know, when the 60 horsepower, you know, bumped it, yeah, there was a big flush, but I don't understand what's in the gravel, how deep in the gravel. And so like on your first video where the boat was going through, it impacted the gravel mildly. Rocks were flipping over, but I don't know, does that, you know, are the eggs 3 inches deep? And it looked like that was the surface. So I'm trying to understand, you know, what the science is related to where the fish are, and if the boats are moving gravel, how detrimental is that to the life in gravel?
Stan, do you want to talk about the life stages, the different times of the?
Yeah, so we've got, in the fall, you've got summer steelhead spawning in certain places. And then, of course, Mike mentioned, we got a small group of springers that start spawning. And we've seen the years when we've spent a lot of time doing surveys, the springer spawning by middle of September. I don't know, Mike, if you see that around your place, but it can be early. And then there's, well, and I guess, Mike, there's some of us call that early or component, like an early fall component, and then the main fall component that, and what you're defining, what I'm defining are probably the same, but what ODFW calls a springer is something that goes all the way up into the gorge. And it's, you know, caught, maybe enters the river in May or June. Is that right, Chris? That sounds right. So where does it go with that? So
What about the eggs? The eggs and
spawning, you've got lamprey that are spawning all the way into late July, August, and their eggs incubate fairly quickly. They're very tiny the first year, like a few millimeters to half an inch. So they're out there the whole period of time, even after they hatch out. And then they're in shallows, so things like wakes are going to affect them. They're typically in back eddies, and they reside in fine sediments, so fine organics, silts, sediments. So that kind of wave action could potentially affect them and make them available to predation by Washington. The egg development, I don't have the numbers in front of me, maybe Chris does, but it's all related to temperature units. So the way you think about eggs and hatcheries is how many temperature days do you have, how many temperature units. If your water warms up in a hatchery scenario and you've got fall Chinook and you're incubating eggs all winter long, you might see them come out a week early if you have some really warm weather for 2 weeks.
So typically is that spring when they're hatching?
As Dylan mentioned earlier, we see fry, main stem Siletz. These are sac fry, so they're coming out of the gravel and they're still kind of, they're not up in the water column, but they're out swimming. That can be late February and definitely 1st of March. And then they continue to come out of the gravel all the way into, I don't know, probably late April, our observations. And then steelhead, winter steelhead, depending on when they're spawning, we have a much broader window of reproduction or spawning activity with them. Earlier winters versus later winters. They're coming out of the gravel probably, I don't know, Chris, yet, you know. We used to have winter steelhead hatcheries that would return, what, early November?
You're talking about winters?
Yeah, when we collectively as
At the
hatcheries
earlier
get
hatcheries,
in and spawn before Thanksgiving. But those dates have moved farther back in time. So I'm not giving you a good answer, a great answer on steel, but a pretty broad window of time. There aren't any salmonids that I'm aware of that are coming out of the gravel in the fall, Alan, or December.
but there would be fertilized eggs and adult
it'd be
spawn
fertilized
in that
eggs.
time period.
I should say also that Dylan O'Keefe, the acting district fish biologist, is in the room. He's really more the local expert than I am, if you have any questions, if that's appropriate. There's a few things I wanted to go over real quick, if you don't mind. It's now an okay time to step on any toes. Yeah, just based on this recent conversation, I think most folks would agree that there are, you know, eggs in the gravel, susceptible life stages of salmonids in the gravel during this popular fall Chinook fishery on the Siletz. I hope we can all agree on that, all right? When you start talking about this stuff, I like to look at it as, you know, how much risk are you willing to assume? It's going dry already. Now, we talked about the pressure gradient issue. Certainly, the pressure gradient issue can have impact on eggs in the gravel if they're come in contact with those pressure waves. And that varies, of course, with the depth of the water we're talking about. Gravel disturbance, we saw that on these videos, right? Now, how much gravel disturbance creates a red washing out, for example? Well, we don't really know in this case, but there's definitely some gravel disturbance. But also keep in mind that when salmon spawn in these main stem tail out areas, those eggs have to survive for up to several months through all of the varying degrees of river flow, including the big flood events. And I work primarily in the Tillamook area, although I cover this area, and we're very familiar with the effects of flood on fish production and those kind of things. And it's clear to me that those main stem spawners, even though it can be great spawning gravel, they're often the first to go during a big flood event. Right. So that's just my way of saying that, some of these red locations, although the salmon choose them maybe based on river flow, right? Because when there's bigger river flow, they tend to go higher in the watershed. But some of these fish, particularly on a low water year, might spawn more heavily in some of these lower main stem areas. And those eggs are going to be more at risk to high flow events should that gravel or should the bedload movement occur during a flood. So keep that in mind. Sedimentation, Stan talked a little bit about sedimentation. Yeah, boats can create sedimentation, whether it's from the gravel or from waves hitting the erodible bank, and that can cause sedimentation. And of course, sedimentation is not great. Fishermen don't necessarily love sedimentation, but also, when fine sediment gets in the red in the gravel of a salmon's red, that disrupts water flow, creates oxygen issues. Not good. But again, that varies based on daily conditions, seasonal conditions, site-specific locations. And probably in the context of using motors, probably on the boat type and the motor type and the horsepower. And of course, operator's use. Some people probably drive their boats differently than others. So those are all the variables within all this. Biochemical stress. Well, what does that mean? That just means that, when you introduce these outside forces to whether it's juvenile fish or adult fish, it can create stress. High stress can impact spawning success, egg survival, and all that stuff. Avoidance. We talked, I think, maybe a little bit about avoidance, but salmon are going to tend to avoid areas of high use. If they're constantly disturbed in the red making process, they might go find another spot to do that. Now, you might say, well, okay, well, everything's fine. They're just going to go find another spot to do that. But, there's thousands of years of selection that went into these fish trying to figure out where they want to spawn. And then moving them off that may not be the most ideal thing for long-term survival of salmon in general. And then lastly, direct injury. I don't think we really covered that at all. But it'd be more of an issue perhaps with jet boats and intake, sucking up, juvenile fish and those kind of things. I doubt that too many adults are getting run over by boats as they're going up these reds, but hey, it's possible. So these are all different, in my mind, this is just my mind, different levels of risk. And we have to balance those with the other good things in life that we like to have, like, fish to catch and those kind of things. So maybe I've rambled on long enough. I just wanted to point out that there's a lot going on here, but man, to throw a dart at the board and hit it dead center on any of these, we don't have the data to say. So what we should be talking about is how much risk are we willing to assume? That's it.
So can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
You said that the main stem spawners may be selecting their spawning areas in those main stem of the river based on flows when they're in the water. And so if the flows are lower, that site might look better to them. And so as the water levels, which we can, I think, reasonably predict, water levels will continue to drop with the climate crisis. We might see more fish spawning in the main stem areas.
My very general point there was that seasonal flows will, in many cases, dictate the distribution of spawning fish on the spawning grounds.
Okay.
There are years where flows are low, and a lot of those tributaries, for example, where Chinook will normally spawn, they won't spawn in those because there's not sufficient flow there. So that forces them to other areas with more flow, more suitable spawning conditions. So climate change effects aside, assuming that you have a lower flow year than average, you will probably see a different distribution of spawners, maybe heavily more weighted towards the main stem than you would see during a more average flow year.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that it's more the impacts to the tributary streams rather than conditions that they encounter in the main stem, that they just,
Well,
tribs aren't as available to them for spawning.
there's certainly that, and who knows how to read in sort of the biochemical cues that these salmon are
Yeah.
getting as they're coming back looking for their natal streams. That's something I won't even venture to go into. But generally speaking, a happy river is one that has, a broad distribution of spawning adults that not only allows them to access the highest quality spawning gravel, but it also spreads out those progeny later on that have to compete for resources. So that's good. So if they're all on one, if all the salmon come back and they're all on one or two reds, that's not good. Putting all the eggs in one basket is not good, as we learned.
Chris, I got an ODW question. Do we have the data over the last 20 years of what your spawn counts on the Siletz River have been? I mean, is that publicly available data? Your spawn surveys for the last 20 years?
Yeah, it might be on the Corvallis Research website. What you're really interested in is sort of the expanded spawning escapement estimate based on those surveys. I think that's what you're.
Yeah, escapement, I'm sorry. What that's looked like over a 20-year period.
If it's not there, maybe Dylan can speak to it better, or.
I think that'd be interesting to take a look at for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of set it up front, compared to other north and mid coast streams and even some further south.
I mean, have we seen
Siletz is doing pretty good.
Have we seen a giant decline, consistent decline over the last 10 years while there's been a prevalent amount of motors in the river? Is that?
Well, I'll say it like this. I think it would be hard pressed for anybody to look at population estimates and correlate those with some intrinsic value of motor, at least at the levels we've seen. Now, you could make the argument, again, I'm probably saying more than I should, you could make the argument that there is a level of motor use, or there is a level of horsepower times how many boats that does create measurable effects. I don't know what that is, and I don't even know for sure that's true. I'm just suggesting right now, there really isn't a way to measure the effects. So you have to look at it more in the context of risk.
I think Chris's comments, jump in here, are super helpful. My personal point of view is the risk. How much risk do you want to assume? We're never going to get an answer on this stuff. We don't have enough money, enough studies. Not to denigrate ODFW at all. They have a lot of good people trying to do a lot of good work. But the estimates we're talking about here that include everything from ocean catch on into the rivers, they often might be 10,000 fish return plus or minus 10 or 12,000. So plus or minus means when you actually
as a statistician, share the amount of error in your estimate, and you honestly say, I'm not sure, but I mean, it's like, there's a lot of slop in here. And that's just a challenge you have. So when you do studies that involve statistics, what you normally do is you'll have a graph, and let's say I got a point here and a point here and a point here. I might say, well, look at this, Joe, boy, we sure are rising up right here. And I don't show you any error values. When I show you error values, then I might have a bar that goes from here to here and then here to here. And all of a sudden I can't compare this point to this point. I can't say that that's different. That's not statistically significant. And that's what gets left behind time after time when we do all these management. So again, it's not denigrating ODFW. It is so hard to do all this stuff and collect the data in a way that we need to collect. That in and of itself, from my opinion, is a challenge. And I think Chris is right on with the risk. There's a lot of this stuff that I just put back to like no brainers. If you have a couple of toddlers, is there a risk if you let them run around in your front lawn on a busy street? Maybe they're not going to hit, but there's some kind of risk there. Your idea of risk is going to be different than my idea of risk. But do any of us want to assume any risk for that resource, our kids, that we're concerned about?
I would perceive risk based on things that I'm seeing get worse. If my level of risk is here, I mean, I work in aviation, that's my profession. So when I see, we base a lot of risk stuff on accidents. And when it's going like this, we all tend to start believing that there's trends that are everything is working well. It's when we start seeing a dump that we start training things differently. And that's what I see in this instance here. If we're at a level where it's so critical that we're not willing to accept any risk, that why are we fishing the river at all? And that's coming from ODFW. I mean, we're at critical abundance, and which we're not, and this river's continuing to stay this way, if not get a little better compared to the other coastal rivers. And I'm not seeing the risk tolerance really. I mean, why there's no risk there to what we're currently doing. The risk doesn't change. We're not seeing diminished returns, right? I mean,
So if this,
I guess that's relative, because you could look back, and I've read studies from papers about 100 years ago when the spring run outpaced.
well, we're not compared 100 years ago.
Well,
I mean,
you brought up the changing run. So
and
what's your time scale? And I'm just trying to comment again on the scientific.
Jay, you had
information.
a comment?
I just was gonna comment on Chris's risk assessment and how it's just a balance. And I think it's reasonable to assume that the current risk that's assumed in the management practices are spot on due to the fact that the Siletz has the best salmon return of all the coastal rivers. I think the mix of risk is just right, the way it currently has been the last several years. That's reasonable to assume. So zooming out, big picture, not talking about each spawning riffle and whatever, but I think it's a good balance of risk right now, the way it is.
Nolan, you have?
I mean, if the Siletz being the shining star on the coast, we eliminated some of that risk, it could be even better, right? Like, it could be incredible. Wouldn't that be sweet?
Well, and I'll tell you from the standpoint of our tribal membership, it needs to be better. There are currently not enough fish in our river. We are not getting the resource that we need. And so if this is one factor that we could look at, I think we need to. And I do think conditions are going to continue to decline. The overall habitat quality trends aren't looking good with some of the modeling. And so we need to get ahead of it. If we want to maintain that status quo, we need to do a better job to mitigate some of these factors that we don't have as much control over. And so that's the perspective that I'm bringing to this, is that one, the current levels are tragically low. We've already got used to such a low return. It's ridiculous. And so we're already well below what this river should and could produce, in my opinion. Gotten used to it. You know, it's like not like seeing 3 mallards instead of 3,000 mallards. You know, it's what we've gotten used to, but it's tragically depleted. And so I do think that there is an issue here that we should be looking at. And again, there's not enough fish in our river right now for anybody.
Like we need to start a hatchery and put in, 2-3 million plants here. That would solve all the problems.
We've talked to ODFW about increasing hatchery production on the Siletz. That's a whole nother issue.
I know. I'm just saying that'd be the first easiest thing to do is put more fish out the door.
That's not the easiest thing to do. The easiest thing to do is
So
address the risks that we
let
have,
me stop
that we
this
know of.
discussion because OSMB does not control fish hatcheries.
Right.
So we have no decision making in that. So I think we've kind of come to a close of the discussion regarding how the science impacts boating.
I would like to see if Dylan has any, ODFW
So-
Dylan has any input.
We'll if Dylan wants to make a public comment, he's more than happy to.
Okay,
So let me go through. So Jerry Kosidar said he wanted to provide public comment.
Yeah,
Now's the time. So let's just do it from the seats.
well, this is something that's, I think, gonna hit home. Euchre Creek, when my dad was a kid living there, there'd be 4,000 to 5,000 fish right around our ranch. When I was a kid, in the survey that I'll get to, when I was a kid, you'd see 400 to 500 in that same stretch of stream. The survey that I got last year, 4 to 5 fish was all that was seen. Now, that's the survey that comes to me every year. There's 4,000 to 5,000. My time, 400 or 500. We're down to 4 to 5 fish now in that same area.
Can I make a correction? I got the paperwork right here.
So no, this is public comment time.
Okay,
Alan, do you want to set a time limit?
Yeah, let's do 2 minutes, kind of our standard. So Max Hoover. Sir.
Yeah. The whole thing, the Siletz might be a shining star now, but just like the Oregon coast, it's getting loved to death. I went down to Tap last weekend. I can't believe there's hog lines on the Siletz now, where there used to never be. There was like over 100 people fishing on the spit there, It's just more pressure hitting these fish. We gotta do everything we can, get more back up in the spawning grounds. I sit there, Jack Morgan, in a drift boat, tell them, don't run me over while I try to pull up towards Cedar Creek. And not one of those jet boats came down river. They all went up. And the river just goes out of shape. I mean, you used to fish a hole right below Cedar Creek and the jet boat would go up and the river would go out to up to half hour because of wash. And you see all the not sludge, but debris tore up when they go up those ripples. So it's got to be impacting the fish no matter what, which is now in the lucky stage that the Siletz seems to be the shining star right now. It used to be other rivers, and now look where they're at. I don't want to see the Siletz get to that point.
Okay, thank you.
No motors.
Jordan?
I agree with Tim. I think we need to look more toward preserving our fish and everything and getting as most that we can out of them, but can't really do as much now, but we need to start preserving fish and the habitats.
Thank you. Scott?
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about there. I would say anybody that wants more fish for the Siletz should get involved with Pacific Salmon Treaty and where all of our fish are disappearing to. You talked about 4,000 or 5,000 fish. We've had about 12,000 to 10,000 in the last couple of years. Dylan and Chris will tell you that the Pacific Salmon Treaty regulates the Siletz to get 4,200 back. Anything above that, they feel like they didn't catch enough fish. People talked about flooding conditions, these lower river spawners. In 99, we had the biggest flood we've ever had. In 2004, we had the biggest returns we've ever had. These fish bury their eggs deep and survive a lot more than people think. If we remove motors, you're going to have anchors. Anchors do way more damage. The rivers up and down the coast that have no motors all are in severe decline, while the Siletz continues to increase or do better. The coho returns over the last 25 years have went from small numbers to huge numbers. So there's a lot of real world examples that the impact we're having isn't much. If they're harvesting 80% of our fish in the ocean, and then we're trying to be conservative, but we're only being conservative on whether or not there's a motor. People like me have spent 15 years trying to stop Pacific salmon trade. We finally got some chinks in the armor of getting reductions up there, and that's why we're seeing better things. But I'd love this passion to go towards that and stand. I mean, Chris and Dylan can talk about the fact that they regulate the Siletz to 4,200 fish now, but they didn't do that. They harvest every fish above that thing.
All right, thank you. With that, the meeting's closed. And thank you all for attending.
I got something.
You have something as a RAC member.
As a RAC member, yeah.
Yeah, so the RAC is closed.
I listed on there, I wanted to make a public comment too. I can't talk anymore.
Yeah, go ahead, go ahead. Sorry.
So I had a good point. It ties back in the first meeting, we talked about handicapped and elderly access,
Yeah.
having, you asked a question, what would happen if there were no motors? So one thing that I didn't point out, but I thought about it since the last meeting, can you turn around and look at the
Yeah,
map?
yeah.
Old Mill Park.
Yeah.
Okay, and then Morgan downriver, and Ojala's in between.
Yep.
So Ojala is a slide, a boat
Yep.
slide, it's 120 feet down.
Yep.
So for elderly people and handicapped, not all handicapped, but some are differently able.
Yeah,
Some
yeah.
people can't launch their boat down a slide.
Yeah.
So if you did no motors, it would preclude all elderly and handicapped from fishing that section from Old Mill to Morgan, because it's 11 miles and somebody that's elderly or handicapped can't row for 11 miles and they can't launch their boat at Ojala Bridge. So that whole section of river would be off limits basically to that population. And I think that's an important fact, because you can't launch at Ojala if you're not physically able and really strong.
Okay. All right. So I think that's the last of the public comments. So I appreciate everybody coming today. We do have the next RAC meeting scheduled. Do you have the date offhand?
October 23rd.
October 23rd. And so we'll get more information on that as we get closer. Thank you guys for showing up. Thanks for the
Thank you.
presentation, Dylan and Stan.